Super Mario 64 is possibly one of the most talked about games of all time. The legacy left behind by Super Mario 64 has changed the face of gaming since its inception, and its influence can be felt throughout all of gaming even today. That's not to say that Super Mario 64 is without its flaws. Looking back at the time period of its release, it's clear to see that much of this game's praise and subsequent nostalgia comes from the circumstances of its birth. From the big jump to 3D, to the secrets and rumours and outright hoaxes that ended up plaguing the game in the years after its release. It's clear to see that many of the opinions now held by the gaming community regarding this game are being propped up by the nostalgic legs of many people's childhoods, the excitement surrounding its release, and the sheer mind-blowing prospect of seeing their favourite Italian plumber in 3D. So whilst we take a retrospective look back at Super Mario 64, please sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. I, like many other people playing Super Mario 64 for the first time, was a kid. I was unburdened by the weight of the world, and like a sponge I absorbed all of the goodness out of every single game I could get my hands on. I didn't play the vanilla Nintendo 64 version, but rather I was given a copy of Super Mario 64 for the DS. My first time running around the castle gardens, exploring the many numerous rooms and corridors, hallways, I was filled with the typical feelings of excitement and awe that being in such a castle would bring. I remember playing it a lot during my childhood when my mind was still young and open to new concepts. I was not tied down by the typical connotations that games at the time had. For me, exploring the possibilities of this castle felt like an endless pastime. It felt like the walls were full of secrets, both easy and hard to find, and that the key to the next set of rooms lies somewhere hidden behind an exciting mystery. This all leads to a perfect layer of nostalgia now hovering over the portions of Super Mario 64 that I played as a child, and despite the fact that I was not old enough to remember the release on N64, I still have managed to create fond memories with this game that are going to last me for a lifetime. With all that being said then, you might be wondering why, if I have such a fond view of this title, I was saying at the beginning of the video that the game is only being propped up by nostalgia and the exciting move of 2D to 3D. Well, you see, nostalgia has a funny way of distorting your views of things. It has the ability to suppress bad memories and bring forward the fondness that you remember feeling at the time. Simply put, nostalgia is just a recollection of feelings and emotions that you remember from a certain time period. You may feel nostalgic for your old childhood home, for instance, because of the happy times you remember. Or you may perhaps feel nostalgic for your favourite show that you used to watch, and again it will be the happy memories that bring it back. My main point to all of this is that the nostalgia you feel for Super Mario 64 may not necessarily be because the game was good, but rather because of your feelings surrounding the game when you first played it. This is further compounded by my statement at the beginning, which says that I, like most people, playing Super Mario 64 for the first time as a kid. Childhoods are the best time for breeding nostalgia. I mean, even simply comparing the feelings I have towards the games that I played as a child, between the ages of 5 and 10, they're vastly different to the feelings I have for the games that I played in my teenage years, and even now as an adult. What I'm saying is that delving into your past and looking at your feelings, it obviously becomes very difficult to separate emotions and feelings from the facts. However, I do believe that I have an interesting viewpoint to offer on my perspective of this. You see, as a kid, I adored the beginning stages. Chuck me into Bob on Battlefield, Womp's Fortress, Jolly Roger Bay. I love it. It's a piece of cake, I have no issues. But step down into the basement and it gets difficult, or I'd lose interest and another more interesting game would steal my attention away, or simply I'd just get bored. My whole point to this being that I have perfect nostalgia goggles for the first few levels of Super Mario 64, but I've never even set foot into the likes of Hazy Maze Cave, Tiny Huge Island, or Tick Tock Clock. So whilst I am familiar with the mechanics of Super Mario 64, that's not why we play the game, and I have a perfect opportunity now, as an adult, to objectively look at what makes these levels so great, and if they truly do hold up, or is it just nostalgia? To first get into the nitty-gritty of the game though, we need to look at its conception. September 7th, 1994 was a Wednesday. Nintendo's Entertainment Analysis and Development Division, aka Nintendo EAD, started development on Super Mario 64. This was to be Mario's big jump from the second dimension to the third. Unlike Mario's previous adventures, developing Super Mario 64 promised to have a monumental set of new challenges and hurdles that the development team would have to jump over if they were going to realise Miyamoto's idea of 3D Mario. The absolute biggest of these hurdles being the controls. You see, at the time, whilst Mario wasn't set to be the world's first 3D platformer, the Nintendo team believed that there was a better solution to how the rest of the industry was beginning to implement the three-dimensional controls. The most common method of this at the time being tank controls. Now, for those of you who are unsure as to what tank controls are, they're simply a method of control designed for digital inputs, as controllers at the time didn't have analog sticks. To combat this, game designers implemented tank controls so that pushing up on the D-pad went forward, down went backwards, left turned left, and right turned right. This restricted the player, however, into only being able to move forwards or backwards, or turning left or right. You couldn't do both at the same time. In time, smarter games and controller designs would improve this somewhat to the point where games could include separate camera and movement controls. But during this time, there was no standardised set of controls, and every game handled this differently. For example, in Crash Bandicoot's implementation of its 3D control system, it allowed for the use of multiple D-pad buttons at once, thus enabling the player to seamlessly move the character in 8 different directions. This did, however, only work as well as it did because the camera's perspective was fixed and it gave no control to the player. Other games, for example, used things like shoulder buttons for turning the camera left and right, and the Crash Bandicoot D-pad style for its movement. But again, this limited the player to only 8 different directions in which the character could move. Whilst this seemed to make sense at the time, if you actually go back and play any of these original 3D games, you quickly realise that the feeling you receive through the controller is that of making do with what you've got. For example, if you look at the major players in the 3D console space at the time, that being the Panasonic 3DO, the Sega Saturn, Sony PlayStation, and the Nintendo 64, only 2 of these actually ended up with major support for analog stick controllers, and all of that is thanks to Nintendo. The rest of the competition had a head start on Nintendo when it came to releasing their consoles, but they had all implemented controller designs very similar to how previous consoles had always done things. I mean, just take a look at the original PlayStation controller and the Super Nintendo controller. They're practically identical aside from the aesthetic differences. And yes, I know, eventually the PS1 had analog controllers, which devolved into the DualShock, which was arguably the best controller of the generation, but all of that got its start thanks to Nintendo's offering. You see, Nintendo was the last of the big companies to throw their hat into the 5th generation of gaming. And whilst there are a few reasons for that, this afforded Nintendo the luxury of learning how their competition were coping within the industry. It is said that while developing the game, Miyamoto requested an analog joystick for the controller so as to be able to control Mario freely in the 3D space. And what was eventually provided to the team was not a joystick, but a controller with a miniature joystick built in. This coincided with the decision for the game to be built in a fully open, free-roaming world, rather than a Super Mario RPG-style viewpoint. With a method of control decided, it was now time to put pen to paper, fingers to keyboards, and design the most advanced, most intricate, most exciting game any of them had ever designed before in their entire lives. You can imagine the developers getting excited and dreaming up new level ideas, new enemy types, awesome platforming challenges for the player to experience, and so on, but no. No. You see, months were spent on just developing the character's movements and how the camera would function. In fact, the vast majority of the game's development time focused solely on Mario's movements and how the camera would follow him around. Giles Goddard, the man who programmed the 3D animation of Mario's head for the start screen, said that the team probably went through close to 1,000 camera setups because Miyamoto couldn't decide on what worked best. In the end, Miyamoto's decision incorporated many of the initial design ideas that they had come up with, including fixed camera angles, cameras that followed the player's movements, and predefined angles that the player could control using the C buttons. But one of the most simple yet useful underpinnings implemented into all of the various camera controls is the ability for Mario to travel in whatever direction the camera is pointing in when the player pushes up on the analog stick. This camera setup, accompanied with the breakthrough of the analog stick, allowed Mario to control unlike anything ever seen before on a home console, and led to some fans saying that it felt like the Nintendo 64's controller was made specifically for this game. However, in a 1999 developer interview with Miyamoto, he stated that people would often tell him that the Nintendo 64 controller felt like it had been made for Mario 64, but he thought that was a problem. The controller needs to be usable for other games, he said, so I can't exactly call it a success when I hear comments like that. I think what this shows is that in Miyamoto's mind, when they were designing the Nintendo 64's controller, they did so to work well with all future 3D games, and that in typical Nintendo fashion they were fighting through uncharted territory, into the unknown according to what they believed to be right. The development team didn't simply want to slap a sticker over Super Mario World saying now in 3D. They wanted to show you how they thought platforming games should and would translate into the 3D space. Unfortunately, however, foraging into the unknown takes a lot of time, skill, and resources, and by the end of 1995 the game was only half finished. Originally the game was slated for a Christmas 1995 release date, but with that date looming and the only playable prototype shown to the public occurring in November, the decision was made to push back the eventual release to summer of 1996. The playable prototype was similar to the final game, although this version was only 50% complete, with about 2% of the texture mapping finished and 32 courses said to be coming to the final game. The lack of polish on what had been completed, along with the game being the 64's killer app, led to Nintendo President Hiroshi Yamauchi giving the green light to delay the entire console launch, and also led to Miyamoto only including 15 courses, scrapping the originally planned 32. The summer of 1996 arrives and the public can now experience this masterpiece. It's launch day, you come home, plug in your new Nintendo 64, sling the cartridge into the slot and fling up that power button. Charles Martinet booms through the speakers as he says,
"It's me, Mario!"
Mario's face fills the screen and you're finally ready to play the game you've been waiting for months. Peach appears with a simple offer of a cake that she has baked for you. So far, life is good. As the camera pans around the garden grounds, you're shown a glimpse of what awaits you. An entirely new world for you to explore. As Mario jumps out of the pipe, all is calm. Looking back at this now from the perspective of a first-time player, I actually think this is perhaps the best way the Mario 64 team could have held your hand and guided an entire group of gamers with no experience into this vastly different type of game, whilst also allowing them all the freedom in the world to explore. This also gives more experienced players the chance to come back and replay the game without being held back by the boring tutorials. In fact, this is one of the most annoying aspects of replaying some of my favourite games. Games I have sunk hundreds of hours in, but games I dread starting over again because of the thought of being slowed down whilst information you're already familiar with is trickle-fed to you. Take the original Assassin's Creed for example. Playing through this game again is a fun and enjoyable experience for me, and the mechanics of the game are much the same throughout the next 3 sequels, so my knowledge of how to play the game is massively advanced compared to that of a novice player starting for the first time. However, every time I want to play the original Assassin's Creed game, I am bombarded with 5 minutes of press this, do that, All information I've already learned and honed throughout my many playthroughs, yet I have to sit through all of this. Super Mario 64, on the other hand, actually handles this perfectly, as unlike other games that take the Assassin's Creed approach, the developers thought it was a much better idea to provide the player with a safe, open area with no enemies, no obstacles, and no urgency. As Mario jumps out of the pipe, he is greeted by Lakitu, who explains the brief set of controls and then lets you on your merry way. There's no background music, meaning you're not kept on edge or pushed to any kind of urgency, and it's just you and the world. Here you can do many of the same activities as you can in the levels, the only difference being that the different missions test your skills in much harder ways. You're free to run, jump, swim, side jump, triple jump, or even just sit there and sleep if you wanted to. You're provided with the perfect playground for you to enjoy and explore the world, all without the dangers and the perils that exist once you jump through the paintings inside the castle. They even give you helpful signposts that can give you hints and tips. Once inside the castle, you're greeted with one of the most recognisable hub areas in gaming. As a child, I remember looking at this in awe. Peach's castle was an amazing labyrinth, filled with puzzles and secrets around every corner. It all felt so real, and I can imagine Peach going about her daily life living there. Every painting led to another area of her kingdom, the locked doors protecting the more private parts of her castle. Going through each of the star doors gave you access to another portion of Peach's kingdom, and with every subsequent star collected, key found, and secret discovered, you eventually made your way through each area of the castle, experiencing all that Miyamoto and his team had to offer. Jumping into the first painting, you're greeted with the level select. Rather unlike Mario's previous escapades, one course does not equal one level, but rather it becomes a giant sandbox for several individual stars to be collected, with each individual mission having the ability to change or alter the landscape to suit. Like in Womp's Fortress, for example, after beating the first mission, a newly formed tower greets you at the summit. Or in Jolly Roger Bay, where the boat was previously sunk at the bottom, it rises up to the surface after your actions from the first mission and brings a whole new set of platforming challenges to the course without having to design an entirely new level. This, coupled with the added hints in the title of each mission, provide a more open-ended gameplay loop as opposed to the more linear style of the side-scrolling Mario games. During development, the game's creators pondered on whether or not they should include the flagpole at the end of each stage. It was a staple in the series at the time, and to get rid of it would have been a big change. But in adding the flagpole, the developers realised that it constricted their creativity when it came to designing not only the courses themselves, but also the missions that would take place within them. They discovered that with courses in which you want to reuse the same area 7 times in a row, simply changing the flagpole's location would not be enough to keep players interested, and that the flagpole gameplay loop was only suited to the one level per course game style. This is why games like Super Mario 3D Land, despite being a 3D Mario game, present much the same as games like Super Mario World or the new Super Mario Bros., with the overworld being spread out and travelling from one level to the next after completing it, and on and on and on in a linear fashion. By removing this restriction, it allowed the world to change dynamically from one mission to the next, enabling a level of immersion not seen before in a Mario game. It meant that not only were you destined to explore these worlds, but you could actually change them through your actions. Entering into Bob-omb Battlefield, you're greeted with the first star mission, Big Bomb on the summit. Your first clue as to where the star is. As you flip onto the ground, you're essentially dropped into another tutorial level. Here you're given a big open area begging to be explored, and new obstacles slowly introduced to you to give you a first taste of the danger lurking in this game. It's no accident that the first enemies that you run into are bob-ombs. They offer no immediate damage when touched, but light themselves on fire when approached, meaning that if you don't run, you're gonna get hurt. Veterans of the series will remember exactly how they would have dealt with these in the previous game, so dealing with them in the same manner, piece of cake. Although, now with the added complexity of depth perception, there are helpful signs and red coins along the way, all slowly introducing the various new mechanics to the players and preparing them for more sophisticated renditions of the same obstacles in courses yet to come. like for example the rotating platforms at the beginning of the stage. It offers you a chance to practice your platforming skills by jumping on them to collect the coin, and provides you with a safe environment to learn that at the top of their path they will flip you over and throw you off. This bears little consequence here, but in Womp's Fortress, using a bigger, more dangerous version of this obstacle is essential in finishing the mission. Not only that, but it also prepares you for the other obstacles later in the game that use similar mechanics. The whole point being that Bob-omb Battlefield serves as an easy way to get up to speed with the new platforming elements that won't instantly kick you out of the level if you fall off, whilst also showing you the importance of learning how to properly traverse these different sections. That's made especially clear when looking at the red coin layout. In all other courses, the red coins are spread out far and wide and designed to make you explore each area of the level, employing all of your skills to reach them. However, in Bob-omb Battlefield, collecting the first red coin presents you with a little number 1 above your head. This prompts you to want to collect more. I mean, if the game is counting, then how many should I try and get, right? Thankfully, straight ahead there is yet another coin. Running over to grab it, you're greeted by the number 2. Coin 3 teaches you valuable skills such as depth perception, as not lining up your jump correctly can cause you to miss the coin and get attacked by the chain chomp. Coins 4, 5 and 6 all teach you the rewards of exploring each corner of the level. Coin number 7 can be easily seen from the bottom of the hill, but can't be reached by running up the hill. Instead, you must learn to control your slide as you attempt to slide down from the top of the hill to collect that coin. Coin number 8 is perched on the top of this floating island. Figuring out how to get there is a tale of figuring out the pink Bob-ombs are friendly, and after King Bob-omb has been defeated, the level dynamically changes so that the pink Bob-ombs can now spare their cannons to propel you up to this new area, once thought unreachable. Learning all of these new moves and skill sets takes time, and while it doesn't want to constrict players by holding their hands and walking them through each new move, gone is the timer seen in previous games. No more is there a countdown telling you that you must hurry up and get to the end. Instead, this approach allows the player breathing room to explore the level, figure out the steps needed to find and collect the star, and then implement those steps as fast or as slow as the player would like. Going through all the missions in this fashion, like defeating King Bob-omb, racing Cooper the Quick, freeing the Chain Chomp, and flying through the sky, all serves as a perfect tutorial to teach you all the basic sets of skills that you'll be using throughout the entire game, much in the same way that World 1-1 does in the original Super Mario Bros. Of course, once you have worked your way through all of these levels, you become well versed in the camera controls, how Mario moves, jumps, slides and kicks, and by now you should be just about ready for the first in a series of Bowser levels. Running through this star door, up the first set of stairs, you're plonked at the end of a long hallway with a painting of Peach at the end. As a kid, I remember getting so excited at the prospect of finally being able to rescue Peach, only for my excitement to be cut short when I fell into Bowser's trap. No Mario game would be complete without the staple linear platforming challenges, but whilst the game tries to break away from the linearity of its predecessors, throwing these levels into the mix every now and again provides the perfect blend of concentrated platforming fun and the more open stage design seen in the bigger courses. These serve as a coming together of all of the skills you have learnt prior to this point as you jump up and climb to face Bowser. In facing Bowser, it's clear that this is a typical Mario boss fight in which it's no more difficult than any of the other bosses that you meet. You grab him 3 times, you throw him 3 times, you win. That's it. I mean, these boss fights exist solely as plot points for the game to provide you with a series of keys. Unlike the stars that the game normally provides you with, the keys open up new areas of the castle for you to enter and explore. Receiving the first key opens up the entire basement for you to explore and find new levels to complete in much the same way as you've completed the previous courses. This does all, however, centre around the main point of the game ultimately being, of course, exploration. And whilst the goal is no longer to make it to the end of the stage, it has now been replaced by find the answer to the star hint at the beginning of the stage. For example, in Cool Cool Mountain's Little Penguin Lost stage, the hint alludes to there being a lost penguin. By exploring the level, you're greeted by the big penguin that you just raced, waiting for you at the bottom of the slide. She informs you that she has lost her baby and enlists you to go and find them. After leaving the slide in the previous mission, you may have spotted a small baby penguin waddling around the roof of the hut at the bottom of the slide. And upon presenting this baby to the mama penguin, she explains that this isn't her baby and that you must keep looking. You're then tasked with exploring the level until you come across the baby at the top of the stage waiting by the cottage you entered to go down the slide. Even if you were eagle-eyed and took notice of this penguin first, traversing the level whilst carrying the penguin is an ordeal in itself, and again goes to prove that exploration pays dividends. By simply carrying the baby penguin over to this broken bridge here, you can teleport down right next to the area in which the mama penguin is waiting for you, thus completing the level in a much easier and quicker fashion than if you had to carry the penguin down by yourself. Exploration permeates through the entire game, whether that's inside a course like Shifting Sandlands, where the 4 pillars grant access to the top of the pyramid, or in Hazy Maze Cave, where the first time I stumbled across the giant sea monster, I prepared myself for an extensive boss battle, only to find out that not only was she friendly, but she was also the answer to grabbing that level's power star. And by exploring further, you come to find that she grants access to the metal cap as well, which in turn grants access to more areas like the maze in Hazy Maze Cave, being able to double back and complete the Through the Jet Stream star in Jolly Roger Bay. And I think the way that the game ties all of these mysteries and these secrets together is a perfect example of exploration rewards done right. Exploration in this game is rewarded with character and ability progression, and in progressing your abilities you are given the chance to then explore even further, which in turn then gives you the chance to progress your abilities even further. Exploring the castle's basement, for example, led me to this room with 2 pillars. My natural instinct as a kid when I first played this was to immediately ground pound them, which led to the water level falling and allowing access to the door in the moat that I'd struggled for hours trying to figure out how to access. This blew my mind as a child and showed me how my actions had a permanent physical impact on this world, and in turn allowed me to explore the hole in the moat, leading to more abilities being granted to me like the Vanishing Cap. This simple reward for my explorative efforts within the castle's hub led me to checking any and all corners of the castle I could find, leading me to find this hidden 8 red coin level in the aquarium room by Jolly Roger Bay, or the secret slide level behind this door. As an adult completing my 100% playthrough for this video, this sense of reward received by my exploration of the latter stages of the castle continued. I had never ventured to the higher floors of the castle before, but attempting to jump into the clock or figuring out where the entrance to Snowman's Land was gave such a supreme feeling of achievement that I hadn't felt in games for a very long time. Something modern games with their repetitive nature just can't quite seem to replicate. Constantly doing fetch quest after fetch quest after fetch quest in Assassin's Creed Valhalla or other similar games led to stale and boring gameplay that I've just never been able to finish them. But Super Mario 64, nearly 25 years its senior, provided me with such a feeling of accomplishment, as I had hoped that I would yet experience more of this feeling if I persevered. In exploring this game, I got to see the joy and the love that the developers poured into Super Mario 64. The creativity of the level designers provided us with courses that would become instant classics, and showed us that Nintendo's magic of game creation and course design translated wonderfully into 3D. I could spend an hour on each course of this game, going into detail of each area, each star, each secret. The level of detail given to each course gives each and every one of them their own personality. Even courses of the same theme, like Cool Mountain and Snowman's Land, they both felt distinct and fresh, despite them being victims of the unfortunate time crunch. Jumping into Snowman's Land, you're acutely aware of the reused music from Cool Mountain, but exploring the course as you gain each of the 6 stars, you're presented with a variety of challenges that keep you entertained and hungry for more. In fact, throughout my entire 16-hour playthrough, the only time I ever got bored or really wanted to stop were when the levels' increase in difficulty grew to frustration levels. And so despite many of the course's themes, music, and even star objectives being reused throughout the game's 15 courses, I always ended up looking forward to the next star, and the excitement of a new world to explore when I jumped through the next painting never waned, especially when I finally thought I'd seen most of what the game had to offer by the 50th or the 60th star, only for then the game to throw you a curveball with Tiny Huge Island's 3 painting mechanic, in which jumping through either the left or the right painting determined your size when you landed in the world. Seeing the world get big or small depending on the star you were trying to achieve had the power to make you feel both huge and invincible, but also made the prospect of facing off giant piranha plants or jumping over huge gaps daunting. Taking a similar concept, Wet Dry World introduced the ability to change the water level depending on the height of your jump when going through the painting, something which became integral to the world's star requirements. But then to see the level designer's creativity with the tiny village where you collect the 8 red coins, I mean, you have no idea it's even there until you figure out how to raise the water up and explore this entirely new section. And in doing so, I was just filled with such a childish sense of curiosity that my mind was blown that they'd even include something like this. Not just to explore this tiny little village, but it made me wonder why. Why was this village here? Who were the people who lived here? Why would they build it in an area that floods so easily? This simple little addition to this level was not needed in the slightest, yet here it was. The course had enough geometry and platforming challenges laid out within it that if they hadn't included this tiny village, you wouldn't miss it. But the development team's creativity, the innate Nintendo-ness, it shines through even in something this simple. It's not simply enough to slap together a level haphazardly and call it a day. It's clear that the designers had fun with it, and it's clear that for some team members this was a passion project. Unfortunately for others though, the time crunch and the stress with making such an immensely important and groundbreaking title such as this meant that by the end of development, a number of the team members had either quit or changed job roles. Most importantly though, the developers took pride in their work and wanted to show off every inch of their creation to us, the players. I can get the biggest feeling of this by the simple fact that 100 coin stars are a necessity to reach the 120 star completion. You can finish the game with only 70 stars, and by doing so you never have to collect all 100 coins in a stage, but for those who love the game enough, or for those who are crazy enough, collecting 100 coins in each stage tests your knowledge and your skills to the absolute limit. In some levels it serves as a showcase of the level designer's work, taking you to every inch of the level in search of every last coin that you can get your hands on. But I'm also convinced that some of the 100 coin stars are simply designed to only grind you down. And we'll talk more about the game's difficulty in a second, but I can safely say that for the most part, I love these stars. The completionist side of me loves the feeling of ticking off each course from my list, and the courses are fun to explore, but there were a few moments where I wanted to give up and quit with how much the difficulty spiked towards the very end. They can all rest easy though, as through their efforts they've created a game that influenced arguably all of gaming. You'd be hard pressed to find a game that doesn't incorporate something that Mario 64 hadn't introduced. Whether through platforming gameplay, to analog controls, to even the tiniest of conventions either altered or even started with Super Mario 64. The developers of the game did a lot of things right when creating this title, and for a first attempt at a full-featured Mario 3D game, they really managed to knock it out of the park. Unfortunately though, we must now cross into what is not so good about Super Mario 64. It may come across as nitpicky, and some of you might not necessarily agree with my views, but they are my views and experiences nonetheless. And so I feel if I'm to share what I enjoyed about the game, then I should also share my grievances too. It has been talked about millions of times on the internet before, but the manner in which Mario's controls translate from the analog stick to him in-game, despite them being revolutionary for the time, absolutely infuriate me. I've heard many other reviewers praise Mario's tight controls and talk about it in a positive light at length, but this is where I feel like the nostalgia goggles come into play massively. Firstly, Mario's movement, like I mentioned at the beginning, is based on him always moving forward when the stick is pushed up, relative to where the camera's positioned, that is. That allows for an impressive amount of control and anticipation of where he's going depending on where you stick the camera. This works well when Mario is running at speed and you change direction. Let's say, for example, you're running to the right and then you slide the analog stick forward. Instead of Mario snapping unnaturally in that direction, he gradually turns to finish pointing the same direction that you are. Whilst this works well in the most ideal of scenarios, it's clear that this control scheme was designed with these scenarios in mind. This all starts to fall apart when, even as you're stood still, Mario first walks forward a few paces to then orientate himself in the new direction. Again, not a problem in most scenarios, but when you're navigating the tighter platforming sections towards the end of the game, this becomes something that will kill you over and over and over again. Well, I can hear you saying that might just be a skill issue, and I'm just clearly not very good at playing video games, but whilst that might be true, my skills, may indeed be lacking compared to someone who has spent hundreds of hours in this game. I believe that my thousands of gameplay hours spent in other games should at least make me semi-proficient in completing some of the tougher stages. And nevertheless, just because people grew up with this game, and for the time the game's controls may have been revolutionary, it does not mean that it should be let off the hook. The whole purpose of this video is to take a look back at this game with the benefit of hindsight and modern examples to compare it to, in order to see how well it holds up in the modern day, or am I correct in thinking that people's feelings towards Super Mario 64 is based on emotional nostalgia rather than objective fact? The fact that Mario does not seem to move exactly as I instruct him to do with the controller is a complete failing on the game's part, as I feel like the control's one and only purpose is to allow me to complete the objectives set out within the game. There were multiple times where I died because I did not have the skill, or I hadn't figured out the correct strategy, or I'd made a silly mistake, and for the most part, in these cases they were annoying, yes, but they gave a sense of challenge which I enjoyed. But for most of the deaths that I experienced within this game, they were solely down to two different problems, that being A, the controls, and B, the camera. Along with the aforementioned control issues, I also found that the way Mario handled compared to his later adventures just felt floaty, almost as if the ground he was walking on was like ice. Taking Super Mario Sunshine as an example, Mario moves in the same way, running and tilting around smoothly, but in this implementation the controls to activate many of his moves require much less space to perform, and as such feel so tight and precise, it makes it a real pleasure to perform. Compare the same move to Super Mario 64 and it takes so much longer to achieve the same goal, it makes the controls feel floaty and dull. The floaty controls would be one thing if it also wasn't for the camera. Do you remember at the beginning where I said the developers settled on a few different forms of camera setups? Well, that's where the problems lie. They don't seem to mix very well. The camera switches between giving you control over where it's facing and seemingly without warning changing the angle for you. In theory, this would work well as it prevents the camera shifting outside the level geometry and helps the game to feel more cinematic, but in practice this means that whilst running forward, Mario ends up changing direction violently, causing him to veer off course and plummet to some form of doom. This means that it changes from mildly annoying having to climb up to your previous position again to throwing you wildly off the course, kicking you out of the level. Modern games implement this in a much more efficient manner by giving the player full control of the camera, but also having a hard edge where the camera can't move past when going up against a wall or a building, for example. This means that nothing unexpected happens whilst also making sure the camera can't go where it's not meant to. I think if this game implemented something similar, then the camera in this game would control 1,000 times better. To touch on the final gripe I have then with the control scheme, it's with its inconsistencies. Entered onto the screen right now is the number of attempts that I took to achieve the 100 coin star on Rainbow Ride. The reason being that in order to collect the 100 coins, you pretty much have to grab the blue coins, which in most levels gives you a really nice quick boost to your coin count and are coins that I really enjoy going to collect, but in this course it only boiled my blood and made me physically sick at the sight of this level, like seriously motion sick. I felt terrible after finishing this level. Every attempt I took at wall jumping, I pressed the jump button at the same interval, but every time I somehow managed to fall. It felt more like luck if I completed it rather than skill, and the amount of trying to do the basic wall jump, failing to grab the coins, jumping to my death to restart the level, trying to wall jump, missing the coins, restart, wait for game over, then run through the castle, up the stairs, jump into that stupid hole, rinse and repeat, meant that I honestly doubt if I could ever want to 100% complete this game ever again. If the controls were at least consistent, so that it became more of a case of my skill letting me down rather than the controls letting me down, then I could perfectly live with that. But the fact that it was the controls holding me back, that's where it starts to infuriate me. But when I repeatedly tried to no avail, despite me doing nothing different from the time it last worked, it left me feeling deflated, motion sick, and frustrated. I even got to the point where I honestly thought I wasn't going to be able to finish the game. I'm not the only one who has thought so, however. I know many of my fellow creators on YouTube feel the same way about the control and the camera schemes, and have said much the same as I have regarding being frustrated by this. That being said though, there were many moments where the camera and the controls worked together in tandem perfectly, and it would be a shame to let a few difficult moments ruin what was an extremely enjoyable experience. That being said, there were many moments where the camera and the controls worked together in tandem perfectly, and it would be a shame to let a few difficult moments ruin what was an extremely enjoyable experience. With all that being said though, delving into this process, I feel I can confidently say that while Super Mario 64's legacy is carried and continued due to people's nostalgia for the game, there's no doubt that even today it can still stand on its own as well. You cannot deny that being Mario's first foray into the 3D realm has been a significant factor into its continued success. I think that objectively both Super Mario 64 and Mario Sunshine are good games, but there's very clearly a reason as to why Mario 64 has been released on every console since the 64, except for the GameCube, whilst the only re-release we've had for Sunshine is the 3D All-Stars pack. When all is said and done, however, and while you may have to strip back many layers of nostalgia to get to the game on its own, looking at it from this perspective, with all of the challenges it faced, emerging into a new era, daring to try something new, especially at a time where doing something wrong would have been make or break for a franchise, I think Miyamoto, and more importantly the whole team at Nintendo EAD, made all of the right choices when there was no one else there to aid them in those decision-making processes. In conclusion then, do I think Super Mario 64 is a good game? Definitely. Would I play it again? Absolutely. Does it deserve the title of one of the greatest games of all time? Without a doubt. I think while Super Mario 64 is shrouded in a deep cloud of nostalgia for gamers all across the world, I think that by playing it again in 2023, almost 30 years since its release, it's proven to me that still to this day it deserves that title, and it's one that it should continue to wear for many years to come. So what if it's been full of nostalgia? At the end of the day, the whole reason why we play games is to enjoy the experience of playing the game, and that is one that I have experienced whilst playing this, and one that I'm sure that every single one of you watching this video will experience as well. And with that, we come to the end of this retrospective look at Super Mario 64. Whilst it is a big nostalgia fest for many people, I understand that at the same time it can still be considered a good game, despite many of its flaws permeating through. I for one have enjoyed very much making this video, and I'm glad that I managed to finally complete this game that I've been trying to do for my entire life. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up, leave a comment on how I can improve, or even if you have a suggestion on any kind of game that you'd like to see in the future, please let me know in the comments down below. But for now, you've been watching When Games Were Fun, and I thank you all so much for watching.
Thank you so much for playing my game.